Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we really get into the details of history, art, well, you name it, to find out what's truly going on beneath the surface. Today, we're zooming in on one of the most famous paintings ever, Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. I mean, it's everywhere, right? We feel like we know it inside out. Jesus, the apostles, that super dramatic moment. But like with so many famous things, there's more to it. Layers of meaning, centuries of questions, especially about something significant that's missing. And this absence, it might just challenge what you thought you knew. The real shock isn't just that women aren't there, lots of people notice that, but the really complex reasons why. And how that absence still sparks, well, really intense debate today. Okay, let's unpack this.
Exactly. And what is fascinating here is the sheer weight of this painting. It was created, between 1495 and 1498? It's this massive cultural artifact, a real window into its time. But yeah, that glaring absence of women, it hits you. And you have to ask, was it just, a historical oversight or deliberate choice based on beliefs or something else? This deep dive is really an invitation for you, the listener, to look critically with us. Let's get past just seeing it and really try to understand it.
Absolutely. That's the mission today. We want to build on that history, go deeper into the historical reasons, the symbolic reasons for this exclusion. And we'll get into some surprising, maybe even a bit shocking theories that have popped up over the last 500 years. We're peeling back the layers, trying to decode some messages here. Why does this absence still feel so significant? So, okay, first things first. To understand why no women are depicted, we need to set the scene, the historical canvas. What do the actual biblical accounts tell us about that final meal? Seems like the place to start, right?
Oh, definitely. It's the essential starting point. If you look at the main accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Shupar, they list Jesus and the 12 apostles. Just them. No mention of any women at the table for that specific meal. And John's gospel, which gives a different kind of intimate perspective, it also focuses only on the male apostles right there at the table. So this biblical foundation, it really set the template for artists for centuries.
Yeah.
It's not just what the texts say, but also what they don't say. That silence shaped things.
Okay, that makes sense from a purely textual view. If the main sources don't mention women there, an artist might just follow that. But what about the society itself? Back in the first century, when the event actually happened, what were the rules, the norms? Did they influence who'd be at a meal like this?
That's a really crucial layer. In first century Jewish society, gender roles were pretty strict, especially around religious and public life. Women's roles were largely seen as domestic, managing the home, family. They generally weren't included in public religious ceremonies or these kinds of significant meals. Those were typically male domains.
So like a Passover Seder, which many believe the Last Supper was.
Exactly. In that cultural context, for Jesus and his core disciples, an all-male gathering would have been the norm, the expectation. It wasn't just about the text. It was deeply embedded in how that society functioned.
Yeah.
It makes their absence in later depictions seem almost expected from that viewpoint.
Right. So even if Jesus himself had been open to it, the culture might have made it really difficult, almost unthinkable for women to be there publicly.
That's powerful. Okay, let's jump forward now, way forward, to the Renaissance, late 15th century, Da Vinci's time. How did the artistic conventions of his era play into this? Was he just painting the Bible story, or were there bigger art trends at work?
That's a great question, because the Renaissance context is key. You have this rebirth of classical Greek and Roman ideas, right? And a big focus on humanism. But while humanism valued the individual, it often looked back to these classical models, which were, let's be honest, deeply patriarchal.
So this respect for classical, often male-led narratives influenced art. You see an emphasis on male figures in leadership roles, intellectual roles. Renaissance artists often stuck to these conventions for religious scenes. Male figures front and center. So Da Vinci painting Jesus and the 12 men, it fits right in. It aligns with the Bible, first century norms, and the artistic tastes of his own time. And here's that surprising little detail. Again, it wasn't for some grand church in Florence.
Right, you mentioned Milan.
Exactly. Commissioned by Duke Ludovico Sforza for the monks' dining hall, the refectory, at Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan. So the immediate audience was monks eating their meals. An all-male depiction makes even more sense in that very specific setting.
Milan, not Florence. That definitely adds context. Okay, so we've got the Bible, first century society, Renaissance art trends. Let's zoom in on Leonardo himself now. He wasn't just following rules, was he? He was a master of observation, emotion, drama. Were his choices about who to include or exclude deliberately serving an artistic or symbolic purpose beyond just convention?
Oh, absolutely. Da Vinci's decisions here were incredibly deliberate. Look at the composition. Jesus is calm, central, a kind of geometric anchor. But around him, the apostles are in these agitated clusters of three. The energy, the drama, it's intense.
Yeah, you can feel the tension.
Right. And by focusing only on these male disciples reacting to the news of betrayal, Da Vinci visually hammers home the traditional story, the story of male leadership, male succession in the early church. It's not just following the rules, it's actively reinforcing that narrative. It highlights their unique role as the chosen witnesses, the foundation stones. It's a visual statement about authority.
So the art reinforces a theological idea too. You mentioned succession. How does this all-male scene connect to that concept of apostolic succession?
That's where the theology gets really specific and important. Many scholars connect the scene directly to the idea that the apostles were the unique foundation of the church. Apostolic succession is the belief that spiritual authority flows directly from Jesus through these specific male apostles and then down through their successors, like bishops.
An unbroken male line, essentially.
Pretty much. It establishes a framework where, theologically speaking, women couldn't hold those foundational authoritative roles because they weren't among the original 12 chosen for that specific purpose in that moment. This perspective really highlights how women's roles, even if important in other ways in early Christianity, were often pushed to the margins when it came to official power and hierarchy. And that marginalization gets reflected, even cemented, in iconic images like the Last Supper.
Wow. Okay. So biblical accounts, first-century norms, Renaissance art, theological doctrines. It all seems to point in one direction, a very traditional all-male picture. It feels like a solid case. But, well, history and art are rarely that neat and tidy. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because flying in the face of all that evidence, there's this really controversial theory, the Mary Magdalene hypothesis. Can you walk us through that? What's the argument there?
Right, this is where modern eyes really start to question the standard story. The theory suggests the figure to Jesus' right, traditionally identified as the Apostle John, might actually be Mary Magdalene.
How? What's the basis for that?
Well, proponents point to a few things. First, the visual depiction itself. That figure looks very youthful, some say androgynous or even feminine. Long hair, gentle features, the way the head is tilted.
Okay. Visually ambiguous, perhaps.
Visually ambiguous, exactly. And then they combine that with interpretations of texts outside the main Bible canon, particularly Gnostic Gospels. Texts like the Gospel of Mary or Philip, which were left out of the official Bible, portray Mary Magdalene as having this incredibly deep spiritual understanding, maybe even closer to Jesus than the male apostles. Some call her his companion.
So alternative scriptures suggesting a different role for her.
Precisely. The idea is that these texts hint at her significance, and perhaps Leonardo, maybe aware of these alternative traditions, deliberately painted her in, hidden in plain sight as John, a kind of coded message.
That is incredibly provocative. It totally reframes the painting, if true. And it's definitely sparked a lot of debate, hasn't it? How have scholars, especially perhaps feminist art historians and theologians, engaged with this whole absence issue?
They've been crucial in pushing this conversation forward. Feminist scholars argue that the absence isn't just about following old texts or conventions. They see it as reflecting much bigger systemic problems. Historical gender inequality, the marginalization of women within religious institutions for centuries.
So the painting becomes a symptom of a larger issue.
Exactly. They argue that how women are portrayed or not portrayed in influential art like this shapes our whole understanding of history, often erasing or downplaying women's actual contributions. They push for re-examination. They point to evidence, even in the main Gospels, that women were vital to Jesus' ministry supporters, witnesses, maybe even leaders, in ways that got sidelined later. So they're saying, let's not just accept the empty seat at the table. Let's ask why it's empty and what power structures kept it that way.
It really highlights how art isn't static. Different perspectives, different questions lead to totally different interpretations. It shows the complexity.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the debate keeps the painting relevant, keeps us talking about these issues centuries later. It's a living piece of history in that sense.
Definitely. Now, stepping back again slightly, beyond just Da Vinci or this one painting, what was life generally like for women during the Renaissance? Does that broader picture help explain their absence here?
That was a central context. Renaissance society, for the vast majority of women, was still very much focused on the domestic sphere. Wife, mother, managing the household. Those were the primary expected roles. Education for women, while it existed for some upper-class women, was often geared towards making them suitable wives, focusing on things like music, classics, maybe some feminine arts.
Not really geared towards public life or leadership roles.
Not typically, no. Opportunities for women in politics, intellectual circles, major artistic commissions, very limited. Their contributions, though absolutely vital to society, weren't valued in the same public way as men's achievements. This environment just reinforced their exclusion from public religious life and narratives of power. Think about it. A female artist back then would have faced huge hurdles just to be an artist, let alone get a commission to paint something as central as the Last Supper, especially if she dared to include women in non-traditional roles.
It just wouldn't have fit the cultural expectations at all.
Exactly. It makes the all-male depiction feel almost inevitable within that specific time and place.
And did this generally translate into how women were shown in art across the board during the Renaissance? Were they usually passive figures?
Very much so, especially in religious and historical paintings. Women often appear as symbols of virtue, beauty, motherhood, like the Virgin Mary, or as saints and martyrs, but rarely as active agents in the main narrative, especially not in positions of authority or leading intellectual discourse alongside men. When they are central, it's often within those established, sometimes subservient archetypes. So the Last Supper, seen in this wider artistic landscape, isn't really an outlier. It's very much in line with how gender and power were typically represented.
Yay.
And the impact of that exclusion, repeated across art and society, is significant. Looking at the Last Supper through all these lenses, biblical, social, artistic, theological, its absence of women becomes this really potent symbol. It reminds us of that long history of marginalization in religious contexts. By actually seeing the absence and asking why, we can start to challenge those old narratives. It gives us insight into power dynamics, gender roles, and how history gets written and painted.
So what does this all mean for you listening now? It's clear this isn't just about one painting. It's like a keyhole, isn't it? A view into centuries of social rules, religious interpretations, and the ongoing, really important work of questioning and relooking at history. It's about digging into these complex layers and realizing that art tells us so much about the world that made it, its biases, its beliefs, its power structures, maybe even more than the story it seems to be telling on the surface. Even silence, like an absence in a painting, can speak volumes if we listen carefully. So, wrapping up this deep dive on the Last Supper, it's obvious there isn't one easy answer for why women aren't depicted at the table. We've touched on the historical setting, societal pressures, art conventions of the Renaissance, deep theological ideas like apostolic succession, and even those really provocative modern theories involving Mary Magdalene. It's this rich mix of factors showing how even a painting we think we know so well can hold so many layers and keep revealing things.
And this raises, I think, an important question for you to carry away, something to mull over. Considering everything we've discussed, the texts, the social rules, the art, the theology, how do these kinds of historical exclusions, these hidden absences, continue to influence us today? How do they shape our ideas about power, about gender, about who gets represented, not just in museums, but everywhere in our world? What other absences might we be missing in the stories we accept as standard? It really challenges us, doesn't it? To stay curious, to question assumptions, and always look for that fuller picture of our shared history.